say I'm speaking about academic freedom, which I think everyone here will know perfectly well is a kind of struggle for freedom that has many contenders in the same site. And I'm going to cover that as best I can. I have been at York University for now, it's going to be, I'm just short of 50 years since I'm doing some post-retirement teaching. But I want to say that the founding generation of this university, when it was very new and very small, was very progressive, and that has continued along the way, which is to say, we had, even in the earliest years, a very substantial number of students who were in wheelchairs, and that was because it was the first university in a major city to employ the curb cut. What a concept, you know, our buildings were built after people regularly thought about accessibility for those who are disabled. Our university early on started to send the faculty directives of various sorts aimed at enhancing tolerance. So we're unsurprised when we receive something like that from what we used to refer to as the 9th floor, where the administration resided. And one of them that brought a great many people out to the Senate chamber, including people who weren't elected to the Senate, but had the right to attend in terms of faculty, was a list of the major religious observances of the, quote, major world religions. And it was it attempted to be a very comprehensive list with pretty much running the gamut from Zoroastrians to Astrozorians. And I have to say, truthfully, I looked around at the assembled faculty who attended this, and I thought to myself, can there really be people, you know, who qualified to be professors at York who don't know that anything about Ramadan, or never heard of it, or don't know that it involves fasting? But when you looked at the list very carefully, you realized that there were lesser known world religions that qualified as world religions. And so there was a good deal of acceptance and pleasure in seeing this kind of directive from the administration, except on the part of a group of students who, at the end of the deliberations, jumped to their feet and identified themselves as Wiccans and rightly complained that they were not included. So the next time, I would say a great many people who weren't senators, like myself, nonetheless, heeded the appeal to appear in Senate, was with a safe space memorandum that was sent around to the faculty by the administration, saying that our job was to make sure that every student felt comfortable in the classroom. Never uncomfortable, always comfortable. And I was sort of thinking to myself, well, here's one way to feel comfy, like read the readings and write the little mini essay that was supposed to be handed in this morning if you want to really feel relaxed when you are sitting around in class. But in fact, that was not the majority response. The majority response, and people rose one after another to express it, was the prof who stood up and said, "I'm not doing my job if I don't shake students out of their safe space, out of their preconceived notions. You're not supposed to feel nonstop comfortable in a classroom. You should be uncomfortable from time to time, and that's why you're in university, to be challenged." More recently, coming from quite a different perspective, a very good dear colleague of ours, Ricardo Greenspoon, a Chilean Israeli Canadian in terms of his provenance, put out a call for colleagues to make sure to come to a Senate meeting, and in particular, Jewish colleagues like me, to respond to the university's directive. How to put it? It wasn't so much a directive as the university was responding increasingly to extremely conservative Jewish organizations who were pressuring the administration to exclude any Palestinian speaker or any speaker of any provenance who was advocating for Palestinian rights. And they were really turning the screws on the university and threatening to withdraw promised donations and what have you. And it was a wonderful session, I must say, where faculty rose and they said, we can't, this was before we had the term cancel culture, but we can't cancel this kind of event. People have to learn how to respond to it. Okay, and so it is that the much more complicated, I think, than faculty pushing back against university administration in the name of academic freedom, as in, who are you to say what I should do in my classroom? And who are you to exclude points of view a priori? We have all the challenges of the actual classroom teaching itself. And I want to speak really to just one or two of those. I teach in, among other things, it's a very interdisciplinary place, but one of the things I teach in is international development studies. And in such classes, you walk in and the majority of students who meet your eye, whether it's a large lecture or it is a small seminar, are going to be largely from Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And even more in my Latin American and Caribbean studies courses, Caribbean students who significantly outweigh anyone else in terms of numbers in the classroom. And then, of course, there's a smattering of others, which is to say people who are not from any of those places, but are passionately interested in those places, possibly to work there in their future. But in any case, people who I think one could assume come with the best of goodwill and the desire to learn. And a huge challenge I have found is to bring everyone into the conversation on equal terms. And this has only gotten more and more difficult. Especially after we have increasingly students who are steeped in post-colonial theory and have really focused in on what that has to tell us, and for whom it plays out effectively, not just by talking about the Middle Passage, not just by talking about the significance of the enslavement of Africans and their journey to the Americas, and the hundreds of years of enslaved labor, of forced labor, or the genocide carried out against indigenous peoples all over the Americas. And our job in these difficult circumstances is to make sure that the people who want to demand from others around them and who pointedly turn to what a wonderful Bangladeshi student of mine once said, to the people of pallor sitting among the people of color, to ask for that apology, to ask for that taking on of responsibility. I consider it my job to diffuse this. So I have one more minute? Okay, so I will quickly tell you, and I would be happy to answer questions later about this, the thing I developed to be able to diffuse this is that I tell students a story out of my own experience, which was that I was an undergraduate at Cornell in the 1960s. I was active in civil rights support groups, but I was particularly active in the anti-war movement in Vietnam against the Vietnamese War. I came home on vacation, 3 weeks of winter break, and I discovered that my lovely parents, who are bright people, who are good people, well, they were certainly on board with civil rights, but they were very touchy about being asked to oppose the war in Vietnam. People in my generation had this a lot because their dads had been in World War II. And they said, well, war is horrible. Of course, war is horrible. And people get killed. It's terrible. You never want to have a war going. But we don't know enough to object. We don't know enough to be part of a movement demanding withdrawal from Vietnam. Well, I worked on my parents for 3 full weeks to bring them around, to open their eyes, to enlighten them, to get them on board, call it what you will. And I left, I went back to Ithaca at the end of 3 weeks, and they hadn't budged. Later on, much later on, they became anti-war activists when there was a Democratic candidate for the presidency articulating the very same views. But what I say to the students, and I can advise you, it works very nicely, is I say, look, if I could not convince my living relatives, bright and good people with whom I had a good relationship, how can I be responsible for things that happen hundreds of years before, and in which I have no particular reason to believe that my forebears were involved? Maybe Maybe they were. Maybe they got out of the shtetl and started becoming involved in the slave trade, but I don't think so. But whether yes or no, I couldn't do it. I can't be responsible for that. And it works. It works pretty well.